Welcome to Normal Guy Games. Make sure you like and subscribe, everyone. This time we're going to be painting a 3D printed miniature that I have taken to calling the Crone. The actual miniature I will link here in just a second. But, so a friend of mine got me this, not this last Christmas, but the Christmas before. And I had really never found a use for it as of yet, but since I just did a review for Verrotwood not long ago, I figured I could paint this particular miniature up and use it for my cult band. So I'm going traditional with this. I'm not going to do slap chop or anything like that. And what I'm going to do is, and one thing to keep in mind about this print, it's not the greatest quality print. I'm not exactly sure where my friend got it from, but it is, it's a very cool and very thematic miniature, but it could stand for a little better quality. Unfortunately, you can still see all of the layer lines on the miniature when you put paint on her, especially when I put the wash on. In hindsight, maybe I should have just done a little bit of, layering up instead of using a wash. But, I just wanted kind of a quick job for this. So I ended up doing her robes in two different colors, actually three different colors. I wanted her robes to look tattered, and I wanted her robes to look like they have basically, they've been through a lot. They're going to be torn, they're going to be ragged, and what I ended up doing is using Deathworld Green, and then I used Ebony Flesh, and I used a Lone Star Leather for all of that. For the wooden part, I used Mournfang Brown. For the highlights on the brown robes, I used Mournfang Brown. And I also used some Scale 75 paints for the hands and for the fur on the back of the robe. Honestly, this probably wasn't the best idea because the paint did not like all of those layer lines. It didn't. I kind of struggled a little bit, I'll be honest with you. So what I'm doing here, instead of doing what I did do multiple layers on some of the stuff here, but the Reaper paints have very decent coverage, so I didn't have to do two layers on the Reaper side. I did have to do 2 layers on the Deathworld Green because I did thin that quite a bit, but honestly, I probably could have gone without thinning it, and maybe that would have helped to fill in some of the mold lines a little bit. Hindsight's 20/20, quite honestly. And I could potentially, if I really wanted, go back and paint another layer or two over top of this and maybe hide some more of those lines. But in the end, I feel like it turned out pretty well. Now, the coolest thing about this miniature is the fact that she is floating off of the ground, and that's the robes are holding her up. That's what's holding the miniature up in itself. And what I ended up doing is at first I was just going to give her like a really kind of a grayish pallor to her skin. But what I ended up doing was making her just very pale and then putting the some of those brown colors on her feet along with a wash to make it look like her feet were just dirty and she's been walking through the muck or just had muck splashed on her. So with doing the traditional method, you can either paint multiple thin layers, so 2 thin coats, or in this particular instance, because of the layer lines on this, you could get away with not thinning your paint so much and just painting a little bit thicker on the model itself. Now, what I was trying to do with the Scale 75, I was actually trying to wet blend on the model, but because those layer lines are there, it was interfering with my ability to get the blending to mesh properly with the miniature itself. So while I was able to do a little bit of wet blending, I was not able to achieve the effects that I wanted because of the fact that of all those layer lines getting in the way. So I'm not entirely too worried about it because I ended up just throwing a brown wash, just Agrax Earthshade, all over the miniature, just to kind of dirty it up. Because obviously, with a setting like the Verrotwood, where it's muddy and dank and dark and dirty and grim and pretty evil, you're going to run into evil stuff, and evil stuff is usually kind of grimy. I mean, there's a reason why they call it grimdark, I guess. So the skin, the first color that I used for scale 75 was a cork brown. Now, the cork brown is a sort of a warm, light brown color. And it's kind of an interesting start out for a basis of skin. It's not too dark, especially once it starts drying. It darkens a little bit, but it's not to the point where it will where throwing a couple of highlights on it will change the skin tone too dramatically. And what I used on top of that was pale skin and pastel pink. And I used the pastel pink very, very sparingly. I only was putting a little bit of the pastel pink into some of the pale skin and kind of using that to do some of the higher parts of the model. Like I was trying to do the knuckles, the edges of the chin, the fingers, things like that, just kind of highlighting things. But it ended up being a little more pale than I wanted it to. So in the end, honestly, that I didn't really even need the pink, because a lot of what I was doing was blending out the cork and the pale skin. So with all of that in mind, the model is a very cool model, and it meets the theme of the Verrotwood setting. So it does look super creepy. You know, you have an old woman that obviously has some sort of necrosis going on her chest there, down towards the bottom on her rib. You can see her ribs. And she is, I'm fairly certain, I know one of her horns broke off in shipping, and that is something you really can't, I mean, I can't fault the shipper for that, because those horns are very, very thin. And I'm fairly certain part of her staff broke off as well, but I kind of left it there. I like the way it looks. It looks like just some sort of worn or broken implement. So I left all of that in place. One thing that I hadn't noticed when I started painting the fur on her back, was that she actually had some hair that was laying on top of the fur. Like, her hair is all in these gray braids. So I ended up having to, in the end, go back and change her hair color, because I had originally wanted her hair color to be that cork brown, to be almost kind of a sickly light brown color. And so in order to differentiate the hair, I actually had to go back and I had to do the hair in like a grayish color. And I ended up using, I want to say it's called Filthy Gray or something like that. It's an army painter paint that I just happened to have laying around, and I decided to try it out. It turned out okay. Honestly, I probably would have changed the color of the fur if I had known it was going to be so close. But in the end, I mean, it still looks good. What I did, once I had everything, all the hair gray, I actually hit the hair with a Nuln Oil wash. And after that is when I did the Agrax. For the horns, the antlers here, and for the skull that's on her face, I used Belathian chitin, which is my go-to bone color. That's actually a Reaper color. Now, one thing also that I had not noticed until I started painting is that the deer skull is actually on some sort of headband, and the top of her head is actually hair. So I had started painting that Belathian chitin on there, thinking it was some sort of helmet, not realizing that she had a little band on the back there. So I ended up going back and painting her hair that gray color on the top as well. Now for the Balathean chitin, because I am painting this over black, I did have to put 2 layers down. And the reason for that is the fact that since the paint is so light, since it's that bone color, that kind of ivory color, the black is going to show through once the bone dries, once that bone color dries out. So I also took a couple of streaks of that cork brown and I put it across the top of the front of the skull and the antlers, just to kind of put some variation on the antlers themselves. I just kind of striped it across the front. Now, as you can see there, this is me fixing the hair. And the 2 colors are so very subtle that honestly, I probably should have used a darker gray when I was doing this. But like I said, in the end, since I put 2 separate washes on it, it actually ended up coming out pretty good. I feel like it's a good enough contrast to where I don't need to go back and put another color across the top of it. So that worked out pretty well. Now what I'm doing here is it's not really I guess it's sort of an edge highlight, but what I'm doing is I'm actually adding Mournfang brown over top of the highest parts of the robe. And I'm not trying to make it look very I'm not trying to blend it in and make it look good. I just kind of wanted to differentiate a couple of pieces of the robe from the main robe body. And in order to do that, I decided to put a lighter color on there. Now, on here, as you can see, I'm actually adding a little bit of steel, the metal, onto the shackles that are on her foot and onto some of her trinkets. I was going to do the bowl, but this particular cultist worships a deity called the Obsidian Lady, so I left her with a black bowl, thinking that maybe, it's made of obsidian, possibly. Maybe it's an artifact that's, that the cult of the Obsidian Lady reveres. So I used those same browns to actually do the mud and the muck around her feet. And that kind of saved me some time and effort, because in the end, I'm going to end up throwing a texture paste over top of it and a couple of tufts. So all I needed was some of that brown underneath, just in case some of the texture paste comes off, or just in case something happens and you can see through to that bottom part. So that's simple enough. Now you can see me here, I'm quickly applying Agrax Earthshade, and I'm making sure it's not pooling too heavily in any one area, except for on the bottoms of the robe. And I did that on purpose because I kind of wanted the robes on the bottom to be rather dirty. Now here you can see I added the texture paste to the bottom of the base and onto the bottoms of the robes as well. And you can't see it, but I did put some on the bottoms of the backs of her feet. Let me tell you, that was a feat to do. Now for the bowl, I actually ended up mixing initially PVA glue with super glue and a little bit of red wash, and that ended up looking pretty good. So anyway, as I said earlier, like and subscribe. I appreciate anybody watching. Thank you.